And it's another Friday, 12 noon Eastern Time here, and we want to welcome you to another episode of the CBC Home Service Success Network. And each and every week when we do this, what we try to do is come up with ideas, concepts, and share ideas with you. And this also comes from the conversations we have with various people that do manage home service enterprises and the problems that they have. And we got to face it, running a business in 2024 is not a simple proposition. People have changed. We're seeing a difference in the productivity, the morale, the way people get upset, everything else. And what often happens is the manager is simply overwhelmed from this. And they have this thing they go into, which is anxiety, causes them to lose sleep, causes them to dread what they got to do of coming in every day. So, what's your answer? The answer is researching the problem, researching the data, and coming up with a strategic plan of how you're going to get into this. Let's here's an example. You can't find good people to hire. So what are you going to do? You have to develop a marketing plan to get outside of the pond you've been fishing on. And where are these good people at out there? That's what Cheryl deals with every day. But as she can share with you, she's at mid morning. I talked to her for a couple minutes. She said she had had two applicants for one company that neither one showed up for the interview this morning. Two people, one company that went through the process of applying and had an interview, and she was ghosted again, which is what she goes through all the time. Other problems come up. Phone isn't ringing as much. We're seeing companies in the chimney industry, and many are having much less backlogs than they've had in the past. So, what are you going to do? You're seeing business go away. You look at it, maybe you're in one of the states that we're seeing fuel oil is disappearing as a fuel due to government regulations and the tax benefits of moving over to electric heating systems. This is real. This is what's happening. So, what you got to do again is develop up these strategic plans. You got to develop up your systems. You got to decide what your mission is in business to get you where you need to go. You're the manager. You have to be a leader. You've got to do research. You got to read books. You got to learn and get someone to mentor you. Get people you can discuss your problem with that can help you go through it. Josh, let's go to you first. As we talk about this subject of a strategic plan, what's on your mind in this? What's the answer? What's the strategic plan that people need to put together to get through this overwhelming, anxiety ridden time in their lives?
There's a few first things. A budget, if you actually had a accounting budget, at least help you make some of those decisions as far as equipment, trucks, things like that. Um, that's one thing just that'll help with you on what projects you can do and that sort of thing. The other thing is like a mission slash vision statement on and how you drive the boat to achieve that. Like we want to be the best, fireplace company in, whatever region. And we're going to do that by, are we doing a training center in house? Do we bring in the best trainers? Do we have the best software, the newest trucks, um, the best people, a few things like that, just to kind of point you in the right direction at all time. I know I've said this before. The bar to do things right, especially in our chimney and fireplace, is really high. There's a lot of hurdles that you have to get through in order just to do a fireplace install correctly. Like someone has to be able to do carpentry, gas, electrical, and not only that, but just know the fireplace. And that's a lot of things for one person to know. And it's really hard. It's really easy to go underneath that bar.
So, Josh, let me ask you this, Coach. You've sat there as a manager of a retail and as a service business. Here's a big anxiety problem that people are being faced with, which is suppliers are not delivering on time and orders are very short, they're incomplete, and it is delaying productivity.
Yeah.
If you were faced with that, what's the strategic plan to get out of this?
Well, a lot of it I kept in stock because I mean, even though I was in a major metropolitan area, I was 3 hours from the nearest supplier if I picked up and went there and had to go get supplies. Um, I had to keep inventory. I had a certain minimum inventory, and then every week I placed because these are what I'm hearing for supply shortages. They're missing delivery dates by a day or two, maybe a week. If you remember back in, like, let's say during COVID, and then I mean, sometime and before then, some of the delivery dates for some years were 4 weeks, 8 weeks out for some of this stuff. And I just kept a rolling inventory of pipe constantly moving. I had auto ordering and I just kept it constantly moving. I had sometimes you had to rob Peter to pay Paul, but there was always stuff coming.
Okay. So you just said an interesting statement. Rob Peter to pay Paul. Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, if I had two incomplete orders, but I knew I had inventory coming in, I would see if I could combine them to get the order out.
Okay. So that's what you mean. You would have materials for one job and possibly rob them to put with another job to get it out on time.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But
what
part of that is, again, that we would order venting every, I think it was either Tuesday or Wednesday was the slow day, right, during the office week. And we would have that PO and it was an auto order. So we would have stock and inventory, but we would just keep supply. We always had minimums. We just kept supply coming.
Okay. So you feel like one of the things is you've got to build up a stocking program so you're not into last minute material needs on your commonly used products, which yes, that does take care of the commonly used products. But
Yeah.
what about on the custom orders? What do you do there?
There's not a lot you can do on custom orders other than be honest with the customer about lead times. And okay, if the vendor tells you 8 weeks, you tell your customer 12 weeks. Because if that vendor takes 9 weeks or 10 weeks, you're in the clear. And if they take less than 12 weeks, then you look like a saint. I got it in early.
Yeah.
So you never want to tell them the real lead time. There's one of my favorite quotes is from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Mr. Scott from the original Star Trek was on there on the next generation, and Geordi LaForge told the captain the real time it took to fix the engine problem. And Mr. Scott looks at Geordi and says, "Well, what's the real time?" And he says, "No, it's going to take me 2 hours." He says, "Well, you always tell the captain double that, because then how's he going to know you're a miracle worker?"
Okay.
That was always one of my favorite lines, because then you've under promised, and now you've over delivered, and you look like a hero.
Do you think part of the problem is, Josh, that we're doing so many different things these days? Is it kind of like McDonald's, where McDonald's had 4 basic products they sold at one time, and now they have this long menu list of products that they're selling? Could that be part of the problem? We're trying to do too many different services and we're spreading ourselves too thin.
How many products does Chick-fil-A sell?
Yeah, that's a good question. Chick-fil-A has an extensive menu, and
I don't think
Chick-fil-A
it's extensive.
they have phenomenal people.
Well, I don't think it's an extensive menu either. You got
Okay.
chicken fries, chicken tenders, and chicken nuggets.
Okay.
Right? Like, is it more than that, really, at its heart? And French fries?
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I can't answer it completely because I hadn't been in a Chick-fil-A in probably 3 or 4 years, so I haven't really seen the menu of it.
No, I think, I mean, you look at McDonald's, they've got hamburgers, chicken sandwiches, filet of fish, chicken tenders. They have a big menu.
Yes.
Chick-fil-A at its heart is just frying chicken sandwiches.
Got you covered. So what you've done, if we look at it, then we would say that Chick-fil-A has studied their market very well. and has come up with something that works for them very productively and profitably. Because to be honest with you, there's a Chick-fil-A between here and Charlotte that Cheryl and I go by, and I am amazed at the amount of delivery cars that are parked at that Chick-fil-A and how many orders they must be delivering every day. It's pretty unreal, isn't it, Cheryl?
It's unreal. Plus, there's always a line there. I mean,
Oh,
always.
Our
always.
local Chick-fil-A has 2 drive-through lanes.
Ours
Right.
does too.
Yeah, that's the other thing you see is the 2 drive-through lanes, and they actually have a human being sitting out there at the drive-through lane. You're not speaking through a speaker where you can't understand the person on the other side.
Speeds up delivery.
Speeds up the process. So what they've done, they've analyzed the problem and they've come up with a solution.
Yep.
And this is what we're talking about today. How do you devise the solution that works and can resolve your issues? So Cheryl, let's move over to you. You go through this every day. You talk to clients every day that are overwhelmed with the issue of hiring. It is just bamboozling. And you go through it from you look at somebody's resume, you call them, you set up an appointment for them to do an interview. They don't show up. What's the strategic plan for this?
I don't know how much of a strategic plan there is. You try to work at getting more people in by, I started sending out an email and a text prior to, you work for it. The main thing, it needs to start within the company, because the thing is, people hire until they have filled their staff and they quit. They don't leave their ads up. They don't keep looking for a rock star. And then the next thing you know, they lose one, then they're frantic again. So the beginning of the strategic plan has to start within the company of deciding how many extra, or as we call them, second string people do they need, because without that second string, there's no strategy that they can put out there that'll work, because the lack of employees will cut into any of the strategic programs they've set up.
Correct. But we'll also take the for instance, which is I've got a client right now. We were intent on building a second string up, just like what we're talking about. Now he's seeing a much lower backlog. And no matter how much I say that the backlog doesn't make you a dime, he's sitting there being felt overwhelmed by this because he sees his backlog dropping, which, to be honest with you, the backlog in the chimney industry, in my opinion, has been one of our biggest weaknesses. We've actually gauged success. Josh, how many people do you see that they gauge their success by the backlog of customers that they have?
A large part of the industry.
It is. It's where we've been spoiled. And so what you got to look at, and that's what I encourage people. When somebody wants something done, and Cheryl, you're an average consumer. When you want something, when do you want it?
Right now.
Right now.
I'm not good at waiting. I will be honest about that. I don't like making people wait, and I'm not good at waiting. And so unless it's just a person that I've used forever, I can find somebody else.
Right. You're going to find a strategic plan. So I'm going to ask you a question. When's the last time you went to a grocery store, Cheryl?
To buy groceries or just to pick up one piece?
To buy groceries. When's the last time you took a shopping buggy and went through the local food line, which is right up the street, less than a mile from here? When's the last time you went there and rolled that aisle?
7, 8 years.
And
when you started shopping with me.
When was the last time you went to a clothing store and bought an article of clothing for yourself at a clothing store?
When you and I went and bought that overcoat that time. Now you tell me how long ago that was.
Got you covered. Even though we have one of the biggest malls in the country sitting right here in this town, don't we?
Yeah, and I'm not going there. I don't do that.
Right. So what this is companies that have developed a strategic plan. And one of the examples I've used for years is Sears Roebuck. If Sears Roebuck had their eyes open to the change of the consumer, they would be Amazon today. Instead of taking action and building a strategic plan to move where they needed to move, they let a guy in Washington State selling books take over the distribution of materials in America.
They were the original Amazon, right? You could order a house and you could order a gun
Now
through
you're
the
talking
catalog.
about, yeah, you're talking about Sears Roebuck.
Yeah, I've got a Sears and Roebuck 270 with a Mauser Action sitting downstairs.
Yeah, yeah, that was it. And what we look at is Sears was built on mail order products. Then they started opening up retail stores. They were in the malls. They were an anchor tenant in many malls. In other words,
Yep.
they were one of the main tenants in a mall. Cheryl, what about that Sears store in Concord? What's up there now?
The service center
Service center's still there.
still there. That's all that's
Okay.
left.
But that whole department store is completely gone because the consumer changed.
And Penny's is, from what I've seen, what little I go in there, they're following suit. And if they don't watch it, they're going to be in the same problem.
I know
Yeah,
Penny's
that's
has been
true.
through a few CEOs of the last few years, 10 or 15,
Mhm.
trying to right that ship.
Yeah. You look
the
at
thing
it.
about it is, you're talking about strategic plans, Jerry. The people that don't write them and just fly by the seat of their pants, like Josh is saying, they're looking for new CEOs to pull it out. They had it right. They should, if they would have kept up what they were doing, kept the strategic plan they had in the beginning. You have to tweak your plan, but you don't have to ditch it.
Yeah. And like I said, I was amazed. I was watching a news story the other day about the 7-Eleven convenience stores. I had no idea how much coffee those stores sell. As I look at it, hey, I'm not a big Starbucks guy. I'm not going to wait in line at a Starbucks to get a cup of coffee. I don't even think Starbucks coffee is that good. I prefer the 7-Eleven. I came out of the airport yesterday morning, early flight coming in, need a cup of coffee. Where'd I go? I went to a 7-Eleven, even though there was a Starbucks right across the street from where the 7-Eleven is that I went to. So that's what you got to do, folks. You got to develop up a strategic plan to compete in today's world. You got to have a strategic marketing plan to bring customers to you. You got to understand the customer is changing. This is what Ford Motor Company found out some years ago. If Ford Motor Company had stayed where they were, there would only be black cars produced. But finally, Ford Motor Company figured out, even though Henry Ford bought it, that everybody didn't want to have a black car. Everybody didn't want to have it. So, Cheryl, you got any additional thoughts on this topic today?
Nothing that people that are in business shouldn't have already researched. The thing about it is you cannot float from day to day and hope to make anything work. You've got to plan things. We plan our meals a lot of times. If you're going to plan your life, you really need to plan your company, because it doesn't take a whole lot to shut a company down anymore.
Yeah. What about you, Josh?
I'm sitting here thinking, if you look at bad managers too, going back and forth, like GE's going through a lot of turmoil, because my brother-in-law works for GE, and they're separating off all sorts of divisions to try and right the ship there at GE. So there's the dealing with day to day, but if you don't have the right plan, is it just focusing on core services? For us, it was, hot tubs was a problem, right? We couldn't train. We had trouble retaining techs to do it, because let's be honest, actually most hot tubs break down in the winter, and who wants to be wet in the winter?
Yeah.
That ended up being a real problem for us. So eventually it was like, okay, let's just focus on our core services and ease some of that frustration up. Like, okay, if we're not able to retain a mason, that's a lot of stress, right? Like there's a lot. I'm not a mason, but I know there's a lot of different things, and there's some really good companies out there that are matching mortar and trying to match brick, and the whole circus of, well, you got to go to 4 different brick yards to find the right brick. Is that really what? Are you really making money there? Those are some of the things you got to figure out. Is like, okay, if I'm having trouble with pellet appliance service, well, stop doing it. I know there's a lot of companies that just said, screw it. I don't have access to the manufacturers, the parts. I don't have the backing to make this happen.
Yeah. And this is where, as a manager, it's time to back off. It's time to take a really hard look at what's working, what isn't working. This is where having an assessment of the business, where someone like myself comes in, takes a hard look at the business, and comes up with a strategic plan for the things that you got to do. But here's what's also required. You got to do the work to make it happen. Having SWOT meetings, going over the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats that the company's facing. You got to make some hard decisions. And a lot of companies, there's people that need to go away. That's just the way it is. They don't fit the culture. They're not producing like they should. But we're caught because we're handcuffed, because we feel like we can't replace them. But that's what has to be done. As a manager, you got to take the hard steps. And that's the thought that I want to leave you with today. As you're coming up and you're ending this year, it's time to take a hard look back at 2024. What worked, what didn't work. I think that come January, we're going to see a lot of changes. I think we're going to see economic changes. Where it will go, nobody knows. We know we're going to have a change in our leadership in this country, and both the presidency and both houses of Congress. How are things going to change? We have to be ready for change to happen. And that's what it's all about, because there's one thing about change. Change is inevitable. It's going to happen. And with that, we want to thank you for joining us today for this conversation about strategic plans. And I'm going to encourage you to get your strategic plan together for 2025 and make it work. It's always an honor, and it's a privilege, and it's a pleasure to speak to you every week like this. And we appreciate you listening to us. Let us know if we can help you move and develop the strategic plan that you need for the success that you want.